This week, we're talking about consumer economics and how this relates to the psychology of financial planning and how we might apply these theories to research and to practice. Remember back from the beginning of class, it's all about that triangle. To inform practice, we need to have research. To have research, we need to have theory. So we need all three components, even though for some of you in the doctoral program, it's a lot more fun for many of us to download some data, run some stats real quick, and publish the results because frankly, that's the easy part. And we can do that, and some people do that, but it makes it very difficult to inform best practices when we have one set of results that's not necessarily based on any guiding framework. So if we get another set of data and we attempt to replicate this information, we might end up with completely different results because we're putting different variables into the model. The theory allows us to know what things might be informing other things. All right, so as we tie this back to the other purpose of this course, which is to inform the public, the average everyday consumer, let's take a look at Wikipedia has to say about household economics and how we might use that to guide our work. So I'm going to type in household economics, and here's what we come up with. It's a fairly well developed page, as you can see from the extensiveness of this page. There's not a lot of elements where it says add citation. We could take a look at the talk page, and really not a lot going on here besides for emerging from family economics to household economics, which was fairly common several years ago. Kind of the whole field shifted from family economics to either consumer economics or household economics. So knowing that it's a fairly well-developed page, let's take a look at what they have to say. Really, we're interested here in decisions made by the household. So if I'm wanting to understand how a couple who's coming into my office is managing their money, maybe I can look at this framework to understand what are some of the contributing factors to the decisions that they're making. I could go off of just my personal experience. And if I go off of my personal experience, what tends to happen is we introduce our own biases. This was my cultural upbringing, and this is what my observations were. And it's not based off of valid and reliable information. Take a look at this page, but what I want to point out here is that this line right here, household economics can be divided into two models. We have the unitary model and then the collective model. If you've done some work in this area, you might be familiar with what those words mean. If not, that's okay, because we can look and find out the unitary model. It was developed by Gary Becker, who's a very well-known scientist within household economics. And he has this very boring book on the family, written in 1981. And it is very econ focused. There are a lot of equations in there. It's very difficult to read, frankly. So it's not really a book that the average everyday consumer is going to pick up and read. So here's a nice summary. This is maybe a place where consumers would go. Frankly, I don't know why they would be looking up household economics, but it's a place we can go as professionals and understand how in the world is this couple coming to this seemingly bizarre conclusion and how they manage their money. Maybe they're looking at it from this unitary model. Within this unitary model, as we're reading through, here's a good line right here. We are saying, well, that's probably not the best line. Here we go. The unitary model assumes that the household is acting as a single individual. In other words, It's not partner one, partner two. It is the household making the decisions. If you have ever been in a relationship with somebody, or even thinking back to growing up, if you had a sibling or cousins or friends that you were attempting to make a decision together of what movie to watch or what to eat for dinner, are you making that decision as a single mind? Have your brain somehow merged and approached that decision making from exactly the same set of preferences? It is possible, but I'm going to guess that you are going to lean towards no, that in fact you both had your own individual preferences. And we can see that that has been one of the big critiques of this model, is that, oh, it's hard for me to pick this up while talking. Here we go. So it's been criticized pretty heavily because we don't know really what each partner's preferences are within this unitary model. And furthermore, we don't know what happens when income increases. And income increases could be the dollars and the cents, or it could be increased time after retirement. So now what do we do with that time, that extra resource? And the we don't know. We don't know if that goes equally to each partner. In the Unitarian model, we would say probably. But we can see that it neglects the power dynamics that might be in play, to where one person gets more say over extra income than the other one. It's been very criticized by feminist economists, as you might imagine, given this kind of unitary approach to the decision making. So we could approach decision making from that framework, or we could approach decision making from the collective model. And you can hear it in my tone which one I'm going to be talking about, because I've already introduced my own biases into the issues. They've highlighted some of the critiques on the Wikipedia page too. In contrast to that unitary model, the collective model assumes that partner one and partner two each have their own bargaining power, and they are both trying to get resources to allocate towards what's important to them. And it doesn't mean that they are not happy with each other. It simply means that they are using their weight, their bargaining power, to allocate resources to what makes them happy as an individual and as a household. So we're still interested in the household, but we're not acting as a single mind. We're acting as two separate minds in one household. So I think it's useful to take a look at this and ponder for a minute how traditional financial planning approaches couples in a financial planning environment. I know it's hard to say out loud, but most financial planning is using the unitary model approach, that we have this one financial plan that's going to work for all members of the household. And we're setting these plans in place that allocate resources to a single utility function. In reality, what we really have going on is more of a collective model, because they are two individual minds. Okay, so it's okay to use the unitary approach or the collective approach. It is useful to understand, as a practitioner, as a human, as a person who might be in a relationship, the ways in which we could approach decision making. So what I was interested in for this particular study, and I'll post the final article in, actually I might post a couple separate articles in the Blackboard modules. But what we're looking at here is, why are couples arguing about money, and what does that impact on relationship satisfaction? So step one kind of looked at the predictors of money arguments, but now let's say we already know what some of those contributing factors are, and we want to know how does the frequency of money arguments influence a couple's relationship satisfactions. Let's take a look at what we already know. We know that financial issues are very frequently rated as the top source of conflict for couples. We know that even couples who are happy argue about money more than other topics such as children or in-laws or drinking, etc. And we also know that financial planners don't often have tools to understand what to do with conflict, particularly between couples. You'll notice that I do use the word marital satisfaction here. And to get even more precise in terms of these are all married couples, they're also primarily heterosexual couples. There are some same-sex couples, but it wasn't enough to differentiate for the analysis. Furthermore, for this particular data set, they only asked about conflict, the frequency of conflict from a female's perspective. So there are always flaws to this data set, but it does ask a little bit more. And I think I'm remembering that right. Let me just scroll ahead real quick. I'm pretty sure it was only females that they asked this to. I think I'm wrong. I think they only asked the question, they asked conflict between men and women, but they only asked relationship satisfaction of women. Either case, we have a data set of women. It does ask about partners, but we're getting perspective of the women here. Okay, so what do we know about money conflict? We know that it's positively associated. So when there's money conflict, there also tends to be different spending personalities. There also tend to be different preferences in terms of giving, maybe some economic pressure, so lower income, and also some ineffective problem-solving skills in general. So it's not just that they're arguing about money, they're arguing about a lot of things. But this doesn't necessarily mean the relationship is doomed, because some arguing might in fact be good for a relationship to indicate that there's conversation happening. And another thing we know is that financial issues take longer to resolve than other types of marital conflict. We know that harsher language is used with financial issues than other types of arguments. And we also know that people who keep records or have good personal financial management don't argue as much. Knowing all of that, we then look at what is our theoretical framework. Generally, we do know from Becker's work, so this is the unitary approach, that couples will marry if their EU, so their expected utility of married for the husband and wife, is greater than or equal to the expected utility of being single for the husband, or plus the expected utility of being single for the woman. We also know that marital satisfaction will decrease if the actual utility of being married cumulatively is less than the expected utility of being divorced for the husband or wife, or the expected utility of marrying other partners, MOP, for the husband or wife. From a graphical perspective, this is what that kind of looks like, to where we're in the green zone. This is good. If the expected, the variance in VAR, the variance in the marriage is greater than what we expected, so the actual is greater than we expected, we know that we're kind of in a danger spot if our actual utility, that yellow, is less than what we expected, but it's still better than nothing. So it's okay. And then not good if we are less than no gains from this marriage. So we're not seeing any benefits of being married at that red zone. Okay, so now here's where we start bringing in the more of a collective model approach. So we see that the relationship satisfaction is a function of the expected gains in marriage and the variance in gains in marriage. And here's where we have some of these elements of a cooperative model. We have, what have we put into this relationship specifically? What did we do ahead of time to find this partner? And then the assortative mating. Are we more similar to one another, or are we more different from one another? Then I need to decide, do I want to use primary data? Do I want to use secondary data? I used secondary data for this study. It's a very large data set. I did this study several years ago, which is why I'm having a hard time remembering who precisely was in the sample off the top of my head. But it's a longitudinal data, which is really incredible because they followed these youth that were between the ages of 14 and 22 when they very first started surveying these people. And they're still doing it today. So if this is a data set that you're interested in, they have the data probably up to 2002 or 2022, excuse me, is available right now. So that 14-year-old is now, how long would that be? I don't know. They're probably close to their mid 40s by now. So really good data, rich data there. And we can look at some of that beginning to end information, which is useful for relationship satisfaction. Okay, so now what we want to do is, what are proxies or ways that we can measure these concepts within the theoretical framework? This is what our empirical model, so how we're going to operationalize these variables, looks like. In red, we have the conceptual framework that relationship satisfaction is a function of this marriage-specific capital, how much time we put into finding this partner, and then how similar and different we are. And then the difference that it was from what we expected. And then in black, we will see the variables that were used to measure this. And here we see that the marriage specific capital includes how much time are we spending arguing in our relationship about money, about other things? How much calm conversation do we have? Did we have children prior to the marriage? And then what are we putting into the marriage? So if we skip down to the bottom, did we have a change in those arguments over time? Did we have a change in our children during the marriage? Did we have more children? And then how long have we been married? And then how much time did we put into searching for our partner? We didn't have information on how long the couple had dated, but we did know how old they were when they got married. So we use that as a proxy to indicate if they were younger, they probably didn't spend a lot of time looking for a partner. And then positive assortative mating, the PAM, is were they of approximately the same age and educational level. For educational level, it was grouped by like high school, less than high school, college, education, graduate degree, etc. For same age, it was within 5 years was considered the same age. That was determined based off of prior literature. And then negative assortative mating, did they have vastly different incomes? And for this, we were looking at within 60%. So if they were 50%, 50-50 to household income plus or minus 10%, then it was considered the same income, otherwise different. So this is where we start bringing in some of that cooperative or non-unitary approach here, to where I want stuff for my utility function, but I might not have the power to do so if I am in a less favorable position in terms of I am much younger than my partner, so maybe I don't get as much say, or if I am if I have a lower educational level than my partner, or if I have lower income than my partner. As I mentioned, this is women only because they were only asked certain questions that men were not asked in this particular data set. It is a problem of the data set. However, we do have longitudinal data, which makes it very rich in that regard to follow couples over time. We'll see based off of the theoretical framework, kind of what I expected to see with the hypothesized direction of if a couple was highly satisfied with their relationship. And then we can see some demographic variables here of where the sample split. And not surprisingly, there's the fewest number of people, as you will see, that often argue about money at the beginning of their relationship. Otherwise, they probably would not have stayed or even gotten married at that point. So fairly evenly distributed between the middle categories, and then not as many people are never arguing. And then we can see it's a really nice split, if you will, in terms of the variance. So 40%, closer to half, stayed the same. So they sometimes argued at the beginning of their marriage. And now when we collected the data, they were arguing about sometimes the same. And then if they went from sometimes to hardly ever, that means they decreased. If they went from sometimes to often, it meant that they increased their money arguments over the duration of their relationship. And then I skipped over the first part, but I split it into two categories, whether or not they were very happy in their relationship or fairly or not too happy. And more than half were very happy in their relationship. Also, we can see the demographics of the different elements that were asked about arguing. So how frequently do you argue about money? And we can see that. How frequently do you argue about chores? We see that, and so on and so forth. And you can see that cumulatively, it's hard to see on here, but if we were to add up all of the lines for money, those exceed the other categories. Chores is right up there with the other one. And here are the results. I put the statistically significant results in red to make them easier to see, meaning we can make some generalizations based off of the red results, but we can't really say anything about the black results because the data doesn't support that this was important in the findings. So if you are into stats, this is an interesting table to look at, but let's look at this one as well, because here we're seeing some other things just as we go down the table of what's statistically significant. And really the only thing that was important with changes or the even differences, bargaining power, was the income changes. And this is when the respondent increased their income. There was a negative relationship with relationship satisfaction. And this is pretty big news because remember, all of the respondents were women. So if the woman increased her income, their relationship satisfaction fell. And that's pretty fascinating as it relates to gender dynamics. And one would think that more income in the household would provide more utility and more happiness. But in fact, we don't see that to be the case. So is this a bargaining power issue to where the woman is not having as much say with that extra income? Is it reflective of traditional gender role expectations? We don't know. But really, if you look here, all of the movement, most of the movement is coming from that. How much are we putting into the relationship? So on the first page of results, there's a lot of red going on, and a lot of this is the marriage specific capital. So we are putting time into this relationship, and we never argued at the beginning of our relationship. So of course we have high relationship satisfaction is what those first two red ones are saying. If we increased our money arguments over time, we have lower relationship satisfaction, also not surprising. if we decrease the frequency of general arguing, of course, we're going to have higher relationship satisfaction. If we're having calm conversations, of course, we're going to have higher relationship satisfaction. So not a lot of surprising stuff there, but sort of interesting as it relates to children are not impacting relationship satisfaction over time, according to this particular model, nor is marital duration. So what do we do with this information? We can see that couples who put that time into the relationship have higher relationship satisfaction. So maybe this is important in terms of preventing divorce. If we can have more conversations about money, maybe this would lower rates of divorce because we're going to have higher relationship satisfaction. But why should financial planners even care about any of this? Because they're not marriage therapists. We do know that couples who are in happy marriages are likely to invest even more into that marriage, i.e., more money for financial planners to manage. Maybe we need to involve some marriage counselors in our financial meetings. So it's not really our issue to deal with the money arguments, but maybe it would be useful in terms of engaging that couple and helping them be successful in that joint household function. And we yeah, that's a pretty long comment there, but when you have two people in the household, they can certainly benefit from some of those general economic terms of specialization of labor and also economies of scale so that we can consume more now and in the future. And my big takeaway from this is maybe we need some more financially based premarital counseling. And this is such a wonderful opportunity to do, even right now as a student, to engage in some pro bono work for young couples. Because we do know that those early arguments are highly predictive of later relationship satisfaction. And maybe this is even a way to generate new clients. So, kind of the key takeaways with this is that we do know some information from the literature as it relates to consumer economics and how we might be able to apply this in a practical sense. We also know some general information of how to apply this in a research sense. And what does any of this have to do with Wikipedia? Well, we can go to Wikipedia and learn in very basic terms what it means to be involved in a marriage from a consumer economic perspective. So is the information that was there accurate from Wikipedia? I would say so. And this is a good thing. If we had approached this Wikipedia article and maybe it was saying something entirely different, maybe we would want to come in here and start making some of those edits and help the average consumer and the average practitioner understand how they might approach these issues with couples. So hopefully that was a little bit helpful. Read the articles that are in Blackboard and try to piece it together with this and see what you think. We will see you in the live class.